Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Medisodes, where we will be looking at the digestive system and how our body absorbs the nutrients and water from the food that we eat. So, the first part of the journey through the digestive system is when we eat the food. And now on to Anupam.
So I'm going to be discussing the first phase of digestion and the mouth and esophagus. So this is the stage where the body reacts to the sight, smell, taste, and thought of food, and where 20% of acid secretion occurs even before food has entered the stomach. So let's talk about the mouth first. It's the first part of the gastrointestinal tract, or GI tract, and has several structures within it to aid the first processes of digestion. These include the teeth, the salivary glands, and the tongue. The teeth are hard, calcified structures designed to mechanically break down items of food by crushing and cutting them. Humans are diffodont, where they develop two sets of teeth throughout their lifetime, their milk or deciduous teeth and their adult teeth later in life. There are four types of teeth within a human: the incisors, which cut food, canines, which are designed to tear food, premolars and molars, both of which are designed to crush food. Their shapes, of course, reflect their uses. Adult humans have 32 teeth in total, 16 up and 16 down, whilst children with their deciduous teeth have 20, 10 up and 10 down. Diseases of the teeth are treated by dentists, and these include plaque, which is a biofilm consisting of large quantities of bacteria building up on the tooth surface, which can cause other oral problems such as gingivitis. These bacteria can also produce lactic acid due to the anaerobic environment, and this can dissolve the calcium and phosphorus in the enamel layer of the teeth. This can later also cause another type of dental problem called cavities, which are caused by acid-producing bacteria destroying the tooth's mineral content and forming holes or cavities. There are actually no known methods to regenerate large amounts of tooth structure, so dentists mostly use preventative measures such as oral hygiene and dietary changes. Remember, it's very important to brush your teeth. Also in the mouth, you'll find salivary glands. There are three main pairs of glands and between 800 to 1,000 minor salivary glands. All of these are exocrine glands, which secrete via ducts that all terminate within the mouth itself. And these are especially important, not just for the digestive processes, but also oral health and speech by providing mouth lubrication. They all produce saliva, which moistens and softens food alongside the teeth to form a bolus of food. The presence of digestive enzymes amylase and lipase is also extremely important within saliva. Amylase breaks down carbohydrates in food into simple sugars, such as maltose and dextrose. These are then further broken down in the small intestine. Saliva is actually responsible for 30% of initial starch digestion. Lipase within the saliva breaks down fats and lipids. Lipase is also produced in the pancreas. However, salivary lipase is very important in babies because their pancreatic lipase has yet to develop. The tongue in the mouth also helps manipulate food into position to be broken down into boluses by the teeth and saliva more effectively. Within the mouth, there's also two other things I would like to touch on: the epiglottis and the pharynx. The epiglottis is a flap of elastic cartilage that blocks off the larynx and trachea and helps direct food towards the esophagus. As we all know, leading off from the mouth there are two pipes, one which connects to the lungs and one which connects to the stomach, and you can develop severe problems if food starts going towards your lungs. The epiglottis helps prevent that by blocking off food via automatic reflex during the process of swallowing. It instead directs food toward the pharynx, which is located directly behind the nasal cavity at the back of the mouth and directly above the esophagus. Muscles in the pharynx push food into the esophagus, which is the next part of the gastrointestinal tract I'm going to talk about. The esophagus passes food from the pharynx to the stomach. It's roughly 25 centimeters long in adults and travels behind the trachea and heart, through the diaphragm, and empties into the top part of the stomach. The innermost layer of the esophagus wall contains a mucosa layer, which is made of stratified squamous epithelium. The mucous membrane and epithelium is being constantly replaced and helps protect the esophagus from food being digested. The esophagus has two muscular sphincters, one located at the top and one at the bottom. The upper sphincter is triggered by the swallowing reflex to open and helps prevent backflow into the pharynx. The lower sphincter remains constricted at all times, other than swallowing and vomiting to help prevent stomach acid reaching the unprotected esophagus and causing heartburn. The esophagus moves food by rhythmic contractions and relaxations of muscle in a process known as peristalsis. This process has two peristaltic waves that move through the smooth muscle of the esophageal wall, and that helps push the bolus of food down into the stomach. This process moves only in one direction, so when you're vomiting, that process is actually carried out by the contraction of the abdominal muscles. Peristalsis does not reverse. Diseases and disorders of the esophagus include esophagitis, which is inflammation of the esophagus. This can be caused by numerous things, such as reflux of stomach acid, infection of disease, medications, or food allergies, and usually leads to painful swallowing. It's usually managed by observing it via endoscopy. However, there is no specific treatment, as there can be numerous causes for the inflammation. Cancer can also occur in the esophagus. There are two common types. Squamous cell carcinomas is a type of carcinoma that can occur in the squamous cells lining the esophagus. This is actually quite common in countries such as China and Iran. The other type is adenocarcinomas, which occur in the glands and columnar tissue of the esophagus, and this is much more seen in developed countries in the West. There's also a condition known as Barrett's esophagus, where there is an abnormal metaplastic change in the mucosal cells lining the lower portion of the esophagus, where they switch from stratified squamous epithelium cells to simple columnar epithelium cells. Goblet cells also form, which are usually only meant to be present in the small and large intestines. This change is usually considered to be a precondition for cancers and is associated with a high incidence of transition to esophageal adenocarcinoma, which is a very deadly cancer mentioned before. The main cause of Barrett's esophagus is thought to be an adaptation to chronic acid exposure from reflux and the inflammation caused by the reflux of stomach acid. Now, I've talked a lot about the stomach, but here's Shrey to enlighten you more about it.
The stomach is a muscular bag which contracts and relaxes, churning your food and mechanically breaking it down into smaller pieces which can be ingested into the body. It also has gastric juice, but you wouldn't want to drink this type of juice. It's made of hydrochloric acid, pepsin, and mucus mixed with a bit of water. Let's start with the hydrochloric acid. It's there to break up foodstuffs by dissolving them away. It also plays a part in making sure that dangerous bacteria that may be on your food do not get into the lower digestive tract, as the hydrochloric acid completely destroys them. The other components are pepsin and similar enzymes, which also help to break down the food into smaller chunks so the body can then more easily ingest and use. So there's also mucus in the stomach, and this protects the stomach lining from the hydrochloric acid. If this is broken and the hydrochloric acid dissolves away the mucus, then the stomach lining is exposed to the hydrochloric acid, and this causes it to burn, and this is incredibly painful, and this is known as a gastric ulcer. So once the stomach has digested away all the food, it's churned it, it's dissolved it, it's broken it down using enzymes, it becomes something called chyme. And this passes into the next phase of the digestive system, which is the small intestine.
The next key organ in the digestive system is the small intestine. This organ is a hollow tube that is approximately 20 feet long. It runs from the stomach to the beginning of the large intestine. The small intestine further breaks down food from the stomach and absorbs most of the nutrients from the food. Almost all nutrients in the diet are absorbed into the blood across the mucosa of the small intestine. The single most important process that takes place in the small intestine to make such absorption possible is the establishment of an electrochemical gradient of sodium across the epithelial cell boundary of the lumen. The small intestine is divided into three structural parts called the duodenum, jejunum, and the ileum. Once chyme, the output of the stomach, enters the duodenum, the liver, pancreas, and gallbladder are stimulated to release digestive juices. This stimulation happens because specialized cells in the lining of the duodenum release hormones that coordinate the activity of these organs. The pancreas secretes up to 1.5 liters of pancreatic juice through a duct into the duodenum daily, which is a massive amount considering the size of the organ. This pancreatic fluid consists mainly of water, but it also contains bicarbonate ions that neutralize the acidity of chyme, and enzymes to further break down proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids, the three main food groups. The gallbladder, which stores bile made in the liver, excretes a small amount of bile at this stage to help digest fats, also through a duct that leads to the duodenum. Bile does not digest lipids in the same way that proteases digest proteins. The components of bile surround fats in a similar way to how dish soap removes fats from a frying pan. This bile is needed to allow for the movement of fats in the water environment of the small intestine. The small intestine then has two types of muscular contractions, called peristalsis and segmentation, that push chyme through the entire length of the intestine. Segmentation sloshes food back and forth in the small intestine, which promotes the mixing of chyme with the digestive juices from the gallbladder and pancreas. Peristalsis, which is the same as the movement of the esophagus, is circular waves of muscular motion to propel food forward in the small intestine. Almost all the components of food are broken down into their simplest units within the first 25 centimeters of the small intestine. Towards the end of the small intestine, so at the point where food is approaching the ileum, the food has been digested from carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids to their monomers, amino acids, monosaccharides, and emulsified fatty acids, respectively. The digestive juices of the small intestine that I've just described take place in the duodenum and jejunum. The next stage, which is nutrient absorption, takes place in the remainder of the small intestine, called the ileum. The small intestine is perfectly adapted for maximizing the efficiency of nutrient absorption. It, in its approximate length of 20 feet, has a surface area greater than 200 square meters, which is approximately the size of a tennis court, to put it into perspective. The internal surface area of the small intestine increases with multiple layers of folding. The internal tissue of the small intestine is covered in tiny villi, which are finger-like projections, that are themselves covered in even smaller projections, called microvilli. The digested nutrients pass through the absorptive cells of the intestine using methods such as diffusion, or, in some cases, special transport proteins in the process of facilitated diffusion. Substances that are absorbed directly into the blood include amino acids, minerals, alcohol, soluble vitamins, and monosaccharides. However, these are not all the substances that are absorbed into the blood. Indeed, larger molecules such as emulsified fatty acids and fat-soluble vitamins are transported first into the lymphatic vessels, which soon meet up with the blood vessels. An important anatomic feature of the small intestine is its highly integrated nervous system, which is located within its wall. This is called the enteric nervous system, or the ENS, and it has an incredibly important role in controlling the muscular activity of the small intestine. Elsewhere in the body, the enteric nervous system is the main branch of the autonomic nervous system, which, as the name suggests, controls the automatic functions of the body, such as breathing. Now, let's talk about the enzymes in the small intestine. Regardless of the countless adaptations that the small intestine has to improve the efficiency of digestion, such as villi and walls containing a complex nervous system, digestion would be all but impossible without enzymes. Enzymes can be described as a biological catalyst. That is, they speed up the rate of reaction without being consumed themselves. Indeed, without enzymes, digestion would not take place fast enough, and not enough would be absorbed from food. Most of the digestive enzymes enter the small intestine through the pancreatic duct, and it is the hormone that stimulates the pancreas to produce enzymes. Proteolytic enzymes, those that break down proteins, such as trypsin and chymotrypsin, are secreted by the pancreas and split proteins into their constituent parts. However, within the category of proteolytic enzymes, there are different types that function in slightly different ways. For example, carboxypeptidase splits proteins one amino acid at a time, but aminopeptidase and dipeptidase release the end amino acid products. Unlike proteins, the breakdown of fats is simpler. Pancreatic lipases break down triglycerides into free fatty acids and monoglycerides, and bile is needed for lipases to work. Now, let's focus on the anatomy of the small intestine, and specifically the duodenum. As I've mentioned before, the small intestine is split into the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. The duodenum can be split into 4 parts: superior, descending, inferior, and ascending. Together, these parts form part of a C shape that is around 25 centimeters long and wraps around the top of the pancreas. The superior of the duodenum, also called the cap, is connected to the liver by a ligament, and it is in this area where duodenal ulceration is most likely to occur. Next, the descending portion of the duodenum curves inferiorly around the head of the pancreas, lying behind the colon and in front of the right kidney. We move on to the inferior duodenum, which travels left, crossing the inferior vena cava and the aorta, before leading on to the ascending duodenum, where the tube progresses up to join the jejunum at a sharp turn. Now that we've gone through the overall function of the small intestine, how its structure is related to its function, and its anatomy, on to Surya for the large intestine.
The chyme, or partially digested food, then passes into the large intestine through a valve called the Bowen's valve. By the time the chyme has reached the large intestine, 90% of the nutrients have already been absorbed. The large intestine is 5 feet long, and this is 1/5 the length of the GI tract, or the gastrointestinal tract. The large intestine can be split into 3 sections: the ascending colon, transverse colon, and then the descending colon. However, before this, there is a pouch called the cecum, and this is considered the start of the large intestine. It is where bacteria breaks down the cellulose in the chyme. At the bottom of the ascending colon is the ileocecic valve. This valve prevents the backflow of the chyme back into the small intestine. The innermost layer of the ascending colon consists of mucosa. Mucosa secrete mucus via goblet cells. This mucus helps to lubricate the feces moving across the lumen of the large intestine. The mucosa also absorb water and minerals from the feces into the blood. The smooth muscle tissue, which is found in the ascending colon, as well as other parts of the large intestine, helps the chyme move up the ascending colon due to peristalsis. The feces then moves along the transverse colon, where water, vitamins, and minerals are absorbed into the bloodstream. The transverse colon has very strong muscle tissue that help the feces through the transverse colon into the descending colon. In the descending colon, the primary function is the storage of feces prior to excretion. However, absorption of vitamins produced by the fermentation carried out by the bacteria in the colon may still occur in the descending colon. So the main functions of the large intestine are converting food into feces, absorbing essential vitamins produced by the gut bacteria, and reclaiming water from the feces. Finally, excretion occurs when smooth muscle tissue contracts, resulting in feces being excreted from the body through the anus. So we hope we have provided a brief but comprehensive journey through the digestive system and how our bodies process what we eat to obtain the molecules, nutrients, vitamins, and water that our body requires. So thank you for listening to this week's episode of Medisodes. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for weekly episodes. Thank you.